Okay, and we're live. So, welcome to the TRT and Hormone Optimization YouTube channel. As a guest today, back with us is Dave Lee. Welcome, Dave.
Thanks for having me back.
So, we're inviting the viewers to write their questions in the chat box, but I already got something from the days that are past. So, let's talk about melatonin. If that is okay with you?
Sure.
Because I always get questions about the melatonin dosing. A lot of people can't believe that some of us are taking 20 milligrams or even 50 milligrams of melatonin at night. So let's talk about that, because here in Belgium, for example, you get 1 milligram tablets maximum, for example. So enlighten us about the dosing.
Yeah, it was the same in Lithuania. You could buy like 1 milligram tablets at the pharmacy, and that was it. Yeah, honestly, like one of the best resources I think on melatonin is on this channel. It's Anthony Labarez from like years ago. He does a great little insight on melatonin. So I'm just going to parrot a lot of what he said because it still stands true to this day. But yeah, when it comes to melatonin, like the thing with melatonin, that there's a few arguments around it, and I think that you can definitely argue all the beneficial effects that melatonin has as an antioxidant in the higher doses or even in lower doses. I mean, it has so many beneficial antioxidant effects to the body that it's definitely a health promoting supplement in that light. However, there is a very, very decent cohort of the population that I've worked with, and I'm sure you've probably seen it as well, where any dose of melatonin, even like 0.1 milligrams, just makes them feel like dog shit the next day. So there's kind of that factor. It's like if it does serve you and work for you and you do tolerate it in a good dose, then I think high doses can offer really beneficial effects. But if you're waking up every morning feeling like, you know, you're just not able to function in the morning without like 3 cups of coffee, then it's just not for you. And just because it has all these antioxidant effect in studies doesn't mean that you should take it if it makes you feel like crap. But when it comes to dosing, like I actually really like how Dr. Crisler used to do it, which was he would get people to buy like 1 and 5 milligram capsules. And then he'd start them at 1 milligram, and then they take that for a few days, and they go up to 2, then 3, and then because melatonin's so cheap, you could buy like a few different increments of strengths, and then that way you could kind of titrate your dose up by maybe 1 milligram every few days and work up to a point. But there is definitely a point for some people where they'll sleep better the more they take, and then they'll reach a point, then it will disrupt their sleep and get worse. But in terms of dosing for melatonin, like I prefer the standard release, not the extended release. And the studies that I've read, it showed that the extended release metabolites lingered and disrupted it was theorized that they would then disrupt the circadian rhythm, the waking response cortisol secretion. So I prefer the instant release for that reason. And yeah, I mean, I usually recommend people start with 1 or 2 milligrams. Some people start with like the 0.3, which is considered like a physiological dose. And yeah, I've got some guys who start at 5 who want to try the high dosing. They work their way up to 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 milligrams. I think that if you're going to go into like the mega dosing realm, it probably makes sense to start checking your waking melatonin levels, like Anthony said in his video. But yeah, you just got to find out if it's something that works for you. And if it does work for you, if it makes you sleep better and you wake up feeling good, then great. But if it gives you like lethargy, mood issues, like if it makes you feel down and shitty, then don't take it. But yeah, I think it's a bit individual.
Okay. And is there any combination that you recommend, like with GABA, for example?
Yeah, so my sleep stack that I recommend for people is CBD oil and phosphatidylserine. So I really like people to use CBD. I dose CBD off body weight, which is something that I've come up with. So it's not based off anything else. But for sleep, for like a good sized dude, I recommend 0.5 milligram per kilogram of body weight to 1 milligram per kilogram of body weight. You can definitely take more, but you'll put a hole in your wallet as you go up. And I think you can hit diminishing returns, and you're probably better hitting a different pathway beyond about 1 milligram per kilogram, in my opinion. And combining that with phosphatidylserine tends to work really well. I like 300 to 600 milligrams of that. Phosphatidylserine requires omega fatty acids to enter the brain, which is found in hemp, so they go together really well. But what you're getting with that combination is something that is very well tolerated by a lot of people. I don't really consider CBD to be a botanical because it works with the endocannabinoid system. So stuff like ashwagandha, lemon balm, valerian, passion flower, all these things work in different ways for different people, but for some people, they can get adverse effects and problems. I find the phosphatidylserine in the CBD promotes really good, just generally good sleep. It promotes better sleep cycles, but people wake up. Usually it will restore morning wood for people. They'll wake up feeling rested and refreshed. But usually people notice they go, this sleeping combination gives me better morning wood than I would usually get without it. So that's why a lot of guys prefer it to other methods, but it tends to be something that gives me a consistent result when I give it to a lot of people. So if I give 10 people that combination, 9 out of 10 will respond well. Whereas if I give 10 people ashwagandha, I'm not going to get a 9 out of 10 positive response rate. So melatonin synergizes very well with that combination. And then for people who need more sleep support beyond that, I think L-theanine in 4 to 6, 800 milligram dosing can be helpful as well. And then for occasional use, I like magnesium threonate. I'm not sold on using it daily because I think withdrawals can be an issue, but I think that's a nice button you can hit occasionally. But there's definitely a bunch of stuff in the sleep realm that you can stack and that you can use synergistically. But CBD, phosphatidylserine is kind of my foundation for sleep. And then melatonin goes very well with that.
Okay, nice, thanks. Let's have a look at the chat box. So Globalismus writes, Doc, non-existent libido post-DECA only cycle, which is lasting years even now on daily TRT, with my T levels being 1100 nanograms per deciliter, free T 26 nanograms per deciliter. So can you give any advice there for non-existing libido post-DECA?
That's tricky because that's going to take a few things to troubleshoot. So I would say that like if you luck out and try the first thing and it works, it's purely luck, but there's definitely a few things that's worth trying. Trying cream. I mean, if you're doing injections, stopping to cream can help. We don't really know what causes DECA dick. It's theorized that it could be some kind of combination of DHN displacing DHT. That's one theory. I think there's also other theories regarding maybe dysregulation of progesterone metabolites potentially, but it would also depend like how much DECA you used for how long. How long did he say this is his post-DECA cycle now?
Lasting years.
Years. Okay, so it's definitely worked its way out of his system. Yeah, I mean, first thing I would do is I'd try cream. I'd also try adding in HCG. I think that can sometimes be a card that just works for some people in these troubleshooting scenarios. And I think there's not really any harm in giving it a whirl. And if all of that fails, I mean, I'd be doing comprehensive testing for pregnenolone, DHEA, thyroid, checking all of those systems, potentially running like either a saliva test or a Dutch test in addition to the serum, so that maybe you can get 2 points of data that might show you something else. But that's going to take some troubleshooting. And yeah, I'm not a fan of using high dose Nandrollon for a lot of reasons, and I think that's a good example of how it can sometimes go wrong. I'd also argue that potentially you could look at doing a cycle of BPC 157. I mean, you could argue that potentially that may heal some DNA signaling through stem cells, but it's something that it's like it will be harmless to do it. So I think it's good to lean into things that are generally going to be health promoting, even if they fail to achieve your targeted goal.
Could this loss of libido be because he did a DECA only cycle because there was no testosterone during that cycle?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, whenever I look at DECA only cycles, I assume that people are still going to use like a trace amount of. So I probably got like coffee foam in my mustache. I didn't choose a good drink to have while we're doing this. It's hard to say, like, because I think a DECA only. I mean, it's not DECA only if you run it with 50 milligrams of test a week, right? But I think not having access to those bioidentical testosterone, DHT, estradiol metabolites is harmful for a long period of time. Could that have caused some kind of permanent neuroinflammation? I don't know. I mean, it's not probably ever going to be studied. We're never really going to know. But I think something like a BPC, HCG, little treatment for a short cycle could be something that may work. But yeah, like I said, I mean, if you've got treatment options that are going to be benign if they don't work, or even health promoting if they don't work, I think you should start with them and then move into stuff that could be more, less beneficial if it fails. But yeah, that's where I'd start.
Okay. So Finn writes, "Hi Dave, I'm on TRT in Australia, 10% compounded cream and 1.5% DHEA." So I guess that's combined in one thing.
Oh
I've
yeah.
heard you I've heard you say stay away from the DHEA. Could you just expand on that a bit for me? Cheers.
Sure. So I've done a couple of lectures on DHEA, man, if you want to watch that. But for anyone watching, I've worked and done a lot of research with pregnenolone and DHEA, like a lot. It's what actually got me into TRT in the first place. So my recommendation after a lot of work with these, like people come to me specifically for expertise on these topics, so I can say this very confidently. I do not recommend people take pregnenolone and DHEA if you don't have a deficiency. It causes, in what I've seen, in the majority of cases when it's not deficient, it will cause side effects. And if it does cause beneficial effects, it doesn't mean that that's the medicine that you need. For example, if you've got anxiety and you have 3 shots of vodka, it doesn't mean that that's the right medicine if it helps with your anxiety, because it will also cause other side effects. So it could be indirectly helping with an issue that is not to do with a deficiency in the hormones. So that's really worth looking at. So the issue with the provider that this gentleman's working with is that, as far as I'm aware, I could be misunderstanding this, but in Australia, a lot of compounding pharmacies will add in a secondary compound to a compounded cream. And this is because certain pharmaceutical companies have agreements with our Therapeutic Goods Association, as far as I'm aware, that they're like the exclusive providers of that specific product. So if you add a second compound in, it's technically not that product. And then I think that's why they do it. But the problem with this clinic, and I know who the clinic is that they add 1.5% DHEA to all their testosterone creams. So everyone gets the same product that's all got DHEA in it, because the people who run this clinic, and if they're watching this, this is some really good advice for them. Not everyone on TRT needs fucking DHEA. So this is why this clinic has a huge drop-off rate. You do not want to have, like, some people would benefit from having the DHEA cream in there, absolutely, but you're better off having it separate so that you can adjust the dose and so forth. But giving it to everyone is going to cause problems in the people who don't need the DHEA, which is going to be the majority. And if you do have to add something to the cream, I recommend adding vitamin D. So when I get testosterone cream done in Australia, if I have to add something, I'm going to add 4,000 IU of vitamin D, because you could argue that there would be benefits to doing that scrotally anyway. But vitamin D is something that we primarily, you could argue, absorb topically. So it just makes more sense. So what you want to do is get a different provider who is going to be able to do ideally a 20% cream, because even that way you could keep the dose the same, but it'll be cheaper for you. You'll have to put less cream on, it'll absorb better. But you want to find out if you need DHEA or not. And if you do need DHEA, you want to be able to optimize that independent of the testosterone. And if you just happen to luck out and that's the right dose for you, then good for you, but it would be unlikely.
It's true. Jesse Heffernan, how often should blood work be done after dialing in TRT, and what panels are necessary once numbers are dialed in?
It depends on your individual state of health. Like if you're at a point where like everything's going perfect, like all your numbers are dialed in, not just your TRT, but like all your inflammatory markers are low, like everything's going sweet, and your TRT is being stable for an extended period, I say annually, but I think most people would probably say every 6 months, but I would do it annually. So, but if you're still dialing things in terms of like overall in your health, not just the TRT, but like nutrition, training, supplementation, liver health, like whatever's going on with you, I would say every 6 months, but somewhere between every 6 months and every year, depending on where you're at. But I get my blood done now annually, but that's because I've been doing the same protocol for HRT now for more than 2 or 3 years. So that's why I do it that way. But yeah, probably every 6 months. And depending on what you're doing, like maybe you could do like a smaller panel at the 6 month mark and then a big panel annually if you're trying to save some money. But the way that I do blood work is I've kind of got 3 panels that I tend to use, and then I tweak them based on if someone's needing something extra that's not usually on there. So I have like a very basic testosterone panel, which is like total, free, SHBG, and sorry, Jordan, estradiol, but that's just because it comes on the panel. So I use that if I'm like just adjusting a TRT dose. or I'll use that for like their very first follow-up. I won't bother measuring all the other markers at 8 to 12 weeks. I think it's too early. And then I have a comprehensive hormone panel that I'll use sometimes. So if everyone's got everything else dialed in and I just want to review the hormones, I'll get basically all of what I mentioned before, plus like DHEA, progesterone, TSH, T3, T4, cortisol, fasting insulin, IGF-1. I'm probably forgetting something. And vitamin D. That's in Australia, that's called a hormone plus thyroid panel on a website called iMedical that I use. And then I've got my comprehensive one, which is kind of like my go-to, which is all of those things. And then in addition, like iron panel, blood cell count, cholesterol panel, liver panel, renal function, C-reactive protein. I think that's it. And then I'll check pregnenolone when I can, when it's available. And that's generally all. Oh, and then if there's something going on with the thyroid, I'll often check like thyroid antibodies, but it's not something that I'll recheck over and over again if they're low. But yeah, those are the 3 panels. So the website in Australia I use is called imedical.com.au. If you want to go on there and you're outside Australia, you can go onto the test pages and screenshot the panels. The only thing that's not included in Sports BB4 Plus is progesterone, which I often add manually. I don't know why that's not included. I reckon they may have stuffed it up. But yeah, so the panels are called Hormone 2, and then it's called Hormone Plus Thyroid. And then the top one is called Sports BB4 Plus. And yeah, imedical.com.au. You can go on the product page, you can screenshot it, and then you can take that to your doctor and get it done.
Great, thanks. Art van der Leij, a very basic TRT question, Dave. Is it true that you cannot supplement your own tea production with some amount of exogenous tea? Because as soon as you use exogenous tea, your natural production shuts down completely.
Yes, if you put in enough that it's going to do the job. If you use like a shitty delivery method, so I got started on Andriol Testo caps, which is like those oral testosterone undecanoate capsules. This was back in 2016. So I think Australia got them super early, but yeah, so I got put on like 1 soft gel 3 times a day, which the first day was sick. Like the first day that I took it, I was like, this is moving me in the right direction. And then after 3 or 4 days, I very quickly noticed that I only felt good for like an hour or 2 after I took them. Okay. So when I got my blood work done, I think I'd taken the soft gel that morning, and then I got the blood work done at midday, and my levels were not suppressed, but my LH and FSH were at like 2 or 3, and my total testosterone was like half of where it was when it was already low. So yeah, you can definitely put a tiny amount of test in there, but you'll be in a worse off position than before you started, because you'll still down regulate your production, but you just won't shut it down. So if you put like, basically, if your body is regulating at whatever level it is, and let's say it's secondary hypogonadism and you're suppressed, if you put a significantly more amount of testosterone in there that your body is naturally producing at that point, you will shut down the feedback mechanism. Absolutely. So in the purpose that we're doing TRT, this can't be done. If it could be done, it would be sick and we'd all be doing it. Like if we could keep our natural production and top it up to a level that was optimal, everyone would be doing that. And this is what I say to guys is like, if we could do TRT optimally, and like I know that you use cream and a lot of guys use cream and that works well, but the reason why guys like me do injections is because there's not a better option. And if there was a better option that didn't involve stabbing ourselves, we would do it. And so would everyone else. But basically it's like you've got the cream or injections, and cream works great for some people and it doesn't work for other people, but it's injections and it's just the way it is. But yeah, it does shut down your natural production, and that's just how, unfortunately, the male body works. And I mean, you could add tamoxifen or Clomid into your TRT and you would keep your LH-FSH signal, but it wouldn't be worth it. Like it would be a net negative overall. So it could be done functionally, but you'd be in a way worse off health position for doing it, and you'd be overriding that feedback mechanism by blocking stuff anyway. So for the purpose of TRT, it would be great if we could do this. If anyone tells you that they can do this, they've either worked something out that we all haven't worked out yet, or they're full of shit, and it would most likely be the second.
So someone, Sandu Sabdejat, is asking about anabolic steroid doses. So we won't go into that. Tren E and Boldenone, etc. Is this a good dose?
I'll comment on Boldenone. So
Okay.
I tell people to avoid Boldenone like the fucking plague. So Boldenone equipoise, it was never approved for human use. Tren was approved for human use for a little bit. Equipoise was never approved. Equine, meaning horse. It's a fucking horse steroid. So in Australia, we have something called the Melbourne Cup, which is this like big annual horse race where everyone dresses up like dickheads and behaves like absolute twats. But it's a big horse race. And like, if you're ever watching a horse race, look at how aggro and fucking cranked out of the skull those horses are. That's equipoise. So what equipoise does in the brain is it disrupts GABA signaling. So GABA is your chief inhibitory neurotransmitter. So when you take Valium, ashwagandha, alcohol, all these different supplements, they work to improve GABA in the brain, which is relaxing, but it's also focusing. It allows for what's called alpha brain waves, which is like a flow state. So if you disrupt GABA using equipoise, you're basically disrupting your body's natural Valium relaxing processes. And you're also jacking up your central nervous system by using a super physiological amount of gear. So Boldenone will increase people's aerobic capacity. Like that's why fighters tend to use it. A lot of people tend to use it because of the performance enhancing benefit, but it is not safe or studied in humans. It never was, but it is neurotoxic as fuck. And for your mental health, it is awful. So there is no reason to use equipoise, and anyone who has any kind of mental health or pre-existing anxiety or issues with stress, it will make you 100 times worse. So it just, there are better options. Don't use equipoise.
Okay, clear. Nikolas Mischle, will TRT improve allergies and gut health?
Wouldn't make it worse. It would indirectly, but I'd say that a dysregulated immune system and potentially an overactive histamine response could come as the downstream effect of chronic stress from being low testosterone for a while. Same with digestive and gut issues. It could be a secondary effect from the chronic state of stress and disease of low testosterone. So yeah, it could help with those things indirectly, but it wouldn't be a direct treatment, no. But it definitely wouldn't make it any worse.
Mm-hmm. So Finn, the guy on the test and DHEA cream from Australia, asks any advice on how to find a good provider in Australia. And I know Dave already made a great video on that. Maybe you want something to add there?
Yeah, so if you, I would recommend watching the video TRT in Australia on this channel, where I basically break down why you don't want to go to an endocrinologist or go through the PBS. And it's pretty self-explanatory. But yeah, if you like, so basically there's a clinic that I partner with called, I won't shout them out on YouTube because I don't know how much publicity they want me to give, but bro, if you email me, dave@advancedfundamentalhealth.com, and you ask for a clinic referral and you just give me some basic details about you, what's going on, maybe give me some blood work as well, I will refer you to the clinic directly. I'll refer you to the owner.
Okay. Another question I got on Messenger is about vitamin D dosing. Like the melatonin, people are always discussing vitamin D because, like here again in Belgium, tablets come in 500 international units, and when you talk to people, well, take 5,000, they don't even believe you. So can you explain a bit on that?
Yeah, I mean, I was really shocked. So so I just spent my first European winter in Lithuania, like being there for the whole winter. And as someone who's spent every winter in Australia, fuck, that was real. So what's fucked is that like vitamin D, I think we could get 4,000 units from like behind the counter, but so expensive. Like no one could afford that. Basically, you'd either take 5,000 units of vitamin D a day, or you'd eat. Like it's one of the two. Like the pricing was absolutely extortionate. Like 1,000 units of vitamin D was more expensive than any other supplement in that store, and all the pharmacies were the same. So whereas in Australia, 5,000 units of vitamin D, you buy it on the internet for like $10 for like a bottle of 200 capsules. So where it's needed the most, it's the most expensive and unavailable, which, I mean, people can kind of work out why that is, but people, particularly in Europe, really need to be supplementing with vitamin D. That's what I learned from being there for a winter. Like, holy shit. So when it comes to vitamin D supplementation, it's important for people to realize a couple of things. One, some people genetically suck at absorbing vitamin D from the sun, and they absorb it better from food. I've got guys in Australia who are tanned to the nines. They work outdoors in the sun all day, every day, and they are vitamin D deficient. I've also got people who I worked with in Eastern Europe who've never taken a vitamin D supplement, pale as a ghost, and they have more vitamin D than that guy. And it's because that they genetically have been able to adapt to their surroundings. And this is, I fall into this category because my genetics are Northern European, is I have an upregulated ability to absorb vitamin D from food and a downregulated ability to absorb it from the sun, because that's what I needed to do to survive. And Stephen, you might be the same. So when it comes to supplementing with vitamin D, if you've got an identified deficiency, generally I just recommend starting with 5,000 units of vitamin D and rechecking at 8 to 12 weeks. If the deficient is astronomical, I will start it at 10. And then in terms of how much people need to maintain an optimal level of vitamin D, which I go through in the lecture that I've done on this channel a while back, some guys only need a couple of thousand units. Some guys don't need any. Recently, I haven't been taking any vitamin D and my levels are still very robust, but I've actively been getting a huge amount of full body sunlight and consuming a lot of vitamin D rich foods. So anywhere from 2,000 to 10,000. I've got some guys on 15 to 20,000. When I was in Lithuania for winter, I was taking 20,000 a day. And I felt a difference on 20 versus 10. But what I will add is that vitamin D supplementation is not a substitute for sunlight. It's not the only nutrient that humans absorb from the sun. So the sun has a lot of really important benefits. So if you can get the sun, get as much of it on your whole body as possible, ideally at different times of the day. But if all you can get is access to vitamin D supplementation, then yeah, 5 to 10,000 IU, and then titrate it just like anything else. But get blood work, let that be your guide. I've only seen a couple of people take their vitamin D to a level that you could argue would be dangerously high. I haven't really seen that many people even be able to push it up to that level, even when taking 15 to 20,000 units a day for a while. So everyone's individual, everyone depends, but yeah, 5 to 10,000 is a good start, and then you can adjust based on your blood work.
What levels are you shooting for there?
For 25 hydroxy vitamin D, somewhere between 100 and 150 is what I'm shooting for. Yeah. So
that's
like, yeah, like depending on the blood work, like I've seen some panels recommend that people go between 100 and 120 as optimal. But I've also seen some panels say that anything above 100 is toxicity. Yeah. But I reviewed a panel the other day from Belarus, and it didn't say toxicity was apparent until 250. So it really depends on the lab you're looking at. But when I did that review for that YouTube video that we did together, I went through all the literature that I could find on positive benefits of vitamin D, and then looking at what the range was that conferred the most benefits, and it was between 100 and 150. Yeah. And then if the whole vitamin K thing, I mean, ideally you'd be getting a robust amount of vitamin K from fermented food in the diet. But if you're not, I think it is prudent to supplement with vitamin K, but more so because you're correcting your vitamin D deficiency. So if you also have a vitamin K deficiency, you should correct that. And a lot of people, unless they're deliberately including fermented food in the diet on a regular basis, are probably deficient in vitamin K.
Okay. Could you describe how testosterone affects the immune system? I have had low T for a long time and constantly get sick, even though I'm very healthy otherwise.
Right. So I know that there are a bunch of direct effects on the immune function, but I definitely couldn't cite all of that off the top of my head. But one of the most profound indirect effects that testosterone has, well, consequential effects, secondary effects, it has is on its antagonism of stress hormones in the body. So when you're chronically stressed and you're constantly in a sympathetic dominant state, it is very common for the immune system to become depleted. And this would be when you're immunocompromised. This can also trigger autoimmune conditions, which is when the immune system can basically become dysregulated and start to attack your own tissue. And then depending on what tissue it attacks is depending on what the autoimmune condition that you have is. So what testosterone does as something that often brings the body into balance and into a state of alignment, particularly in the face of chronic stress or coming out of trauma, is that it allows you to manage stress better and have more resiliency, both physiologically and psychologically. And then when the body is more resilient and less stressed, you're going to have more of a robust immune system. And ideally, you would be able to also be less stressed, which could help reduce the flare up of a stress-induced autoimmune condition. So it supports your testosterone and the endocrine system sit very, very high in terms of the downstream effects in the body. DHEA is also extremely important for the immune system as well. So I do know that there are specific benefits on immune responses, but I couldn't quote them off the top of my head.
Okay. I recently read an article. I will put the link in the chat box for those who are interested. And it was about low testosterone on a hospital admission with COVID-19 infection is associated with increased mortality. Mm. And the conclusion was, that serum total testosterone was inversely associated with mortality in men with COVID-19.
Yeah. And then the thing that we can look at is going, okay, well, did all the factors that lead to low testosterone, like obesity, or all these factors that we well know of, are they what are causing the worst outcomes with COVID, or is the suppressed testosterone directly related to how the body gets through COVID? And likely it's both, right? I mean, usually it's both, but how much of it is from column A and how much of it is from column B, we're likely never going to know. But I don't know. I when I had COVID and I took 100 milligram jab of Primo, I felt a lot better.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
Okay. We threw the questions there, and I got something from Facebook the other day. Let me have a look. I know there was another question in the group.
I should also clarify that Primobolan was prescribed to me for medical purposes in a country where it was legal to use, just to clarify.
So it is legal in Australia?
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's thick. It's when you get prescription Primo, you work out why it's 100 milligram per mil. There is no way that they could get any more into that. It is like goo.
So it's painful to inject?
It's not I wouldn't say it's, if you injected a lot of it at once, yeah, it would be, but it's very slow going. Drawing and shooting that through a 27 is slow times. It makes regular testosterone feel like water.
Okay.
Super viscous.
Okay, this was a question in the group the other day that I found interesting. I'm on Nandrollon decanoate in addition to testosterone cream. I'm suspecting the Nandrollon is causing too many unwanted side effects and would like to come off. Is it more advisable to stop cold turkey or taper off? If tapering off is better, how long should I take to phase out?
Right, so it would definitely depend on what's going on underneath. That was why he used Nandrollon in the first place, because you definitely don't want to have a rebound of chronic pain issues or inflammation. But the thing with Nandrollon, assuming he's using decanoate, is it's got a very long half-life. So if you discontinue it, you're going to taper off it automatically, because it will take a while to leave the body. But because this comes up for my clients all the time, they go on Nandrollon because they hear it's good for joint pain. And then usually it's not that effective for their kind of joint pain because it's not from an injury. And then they realize it usually takes them a while for the side effects to kind of rear up. And then they realize that it's not for them. And then they've got to get it out of the body. But what I recommend doing is substituting something else into the equation that's going to do similar things to what usually they wanted the Nandrollon to do, which maybe it didn't do for them, and then pull it out. And that way you can kind of get the best of both worlds. Or if the Nandrollon was really helping, but it was causing side effects, that way you can kind of have a smoother removal. So I really recommend CBD and then raw CBD, CBDA. CBDA has very strong COX-2 inhibitor properties. So 25 milligrams of raw CBD every morning can often be a game changer for people with chronic inflammatory issues. And then beyond that, there's a product that I recommend for people with chronic joint pain. It's called AR-NCAP by Thorne. It's basically just a cocktail of all the effective natural anti-inflammatory compounds. So everything from glucosamine, MSM, phytosomal curcumin, it's just got everything in it in a solid dose. So that combination can often be enough to reduce the inflammation down to a point that it is manageable, and then you can work with the root cause. But yeah, usually you want to substitute in a different tool to do the job, and ideally a tool that's ideally health promoting, like I was saying before. Like if you can find something that's good for you and just going to reduce inflammation, great. Nandrollon, I don't really think people could argue that's good for you unless it's reducing pain to a degree that you can then substitute out like a significant amount of opioids or other painkillers.
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
Or it gives you quality of life. I mean, if you've got debilitating fucking pain and you can use 25 milligrams of Nandrollon a week and that gives you the ability to walk and squat pain free, fucking go the Nandrollon 100%.
All right. John Lancy writes, hi, I'm a 20-year-old guy from Germany. I'm on TRT since 4 weeks, but I still don't feel any benefits. Is that possible? I have lots of symptoms like hair loss, muscle pain, low libido, no energy at all.
4 weeks?
Yeah.
Yeah. Give it 4 months and then give it 4 years. TRT takes time. Like, I mean, we've spoken about this a lot, and I really understand when guys are starting out and they want to be at end game, like because you found out what your problem is and now you kind of got to wait. But I think, I mean, in my experience, I mean, I'm coming up to, when did I start? So I'm coming up to 8 years on TRT. And when I talk to other people who've been on for 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years, they're like, oh yeah, benefits are still showing up now. Like it's still compounding in terms of what I'm noticing the effects are. So you got to give it time. And what I explain to my guys when I work with them is like, the starting goal of doing TRT is kind of like throwing a dart at the dartboard. Like you're most likely not going to hit the bullseye, but the idea is to get close. Because if some guy starts on 120 or 150 or whatever a week, ideally that's going to be his perfect dose in a perfect world. But because everyone's different and responds differently, all we can do is go, okay, well, let's make an educated guess on what's going to be good for you. But then you check in usually in probably another month or two after this gentleman started, depending on his provider. And you go, okay, where are you on the dartboard? And maybe you're way off to the sides. But what they'll generally do is go, okay, we don't know where your bullseye is. We have no idea, but we're going to move it to roughly where we think it is, make a good spot, and then you leave it. And that's what guys really need to do, is they need to get to the point where they can put trust into the process, trust into their provider, which is hard because then they've got to find a competent provider, which, I mean, if you're not able to access a lot of the providers in this group, it is very difficult, especially in Europe. This guy's in Germany, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so tricky as. So that's one of the biggest challenges in Europe that I learned there. When people go change provider to a better one, it's like there aren't any. Like there's no one to choose from. But yeah, basically what you want to do is the main benefits from TRT, I think people when they're starting out, and I understand why, because they're new to it, is they're looking for the acute effects. And the acute effects are nice, but what we're really looking for in resolution of low T symptoms is chronic exposure to androgens and how that will undo and reprogram through DNA signaling the maladaptive coping mechanisms and basically faulty pathways that are formed from a prolonged experience of low testosterone. And this can be mental thought processes to do with learned fear and low self-esteem and the identity, physiological processes to do with inflammation and all kinds of issues resulting from low testosterone. But then you've also got the biggest part of the equation, which is the impact that the low testosterone has had on the discourse of your life. So if you've had low testosterone during your formative years or for decades, you're going to be in a situation that you now need to come back from. So you may have a lot of work to do in terms of working on your body, your mind, your career, your relationships, all these different things that you may have a bunch of work to do until you can get to the point where you have the benefits of being a high testosterone man. Because when you look at all these guys out in the world who are like, what people would perceive or identify as like an alpha high testosterone man, it's not just because he has testosterone that he's like that. It's all the habits and everything around him that makes him that way. And generally guys have got to go from being at nothing or being in a state of dysfunction to building all those things and then doing them consistently. And that's where I think people would rather, and I understand why people feel this way, because they get sold that this is the solution, is that the difference between here and here, it's this injectable version of this peptide, or it's this supplement from this person, but fuck off. Like it's work. And there are supplements that can help that pathway, and dialing in the testosterone to getting it perfect will definitely expedite that process. But the foundation of where this gentleman is at is get it roughly right, within roughly around that bullseye, leave it and go and show up every way that you go to bed every night proud of yourself, that you're 1% better than you were yesterday. Do that for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks at a time. And that positive momentum forward is the healing response that you're looking for from TRT.
Okay. New trader writes, 35-year-old male here, can TRT help with chronic OCD, like fear of leaving the house, germs, fear of movement? Many psychologists haven't been able to help. Test level was 30 nanomoles last time I checked. Thank you.
30 or 13?
13.
13. Right. So it's possible that it's implicated for sure. So I see, and one of the reasons why I dropped out of neuropsych was that like anyone can get diagnosed with OCD. Like I've seen people who just like stuff neat and tidy who've been diagnosed as OCD. There's a very big difference between not being able to function if something is not a specific way in an obsessive manner versus, you know, we just throw around like, oh, I'm OCD about this, OCD about this. It's like, no, you're not. Like OCD is a different league. So if you've got true OCD that's in a different league, testosterone may help the outcome of your therapy and your path forward, but it's not going to be a panacea that's going to cure it. But if you've got issues relating to control, which are like you're being hyper controlling of variables that you can control because you're afraid of what you can't control, which is a lot of the time what gets diagnosed as OCD, these maladaptive coping mechanisms that you've formed, if you can identify that they're not serving you, and TRT may help you overcome that, but it's not going to just switch that off for you, but it may allow you to do the work in the pathways that are needed to be done to resolve this. But it depends on what you're actually dealing with as to how much of a benefit it's going to be in that outcome. But it'll be a useful part of the equation either way, for sure.
Another question I got, how do you know if we need to come off TRT when trying for a baby?
Oh, okay, I talk about this a lot. For that previous gentleman with the OCD, I'm not usually a fan of 5-HTP, but I have seen 5-HTP supplementation twice a day help a lot with OCD. So that's something he could look into. But yeah, okay. So the baby stuff. This is a big fucking convoluted, depending on who you talk to, topic. So I'll give my 2 cents. But if someone heard differently elsewhere or someone disagrees, then like, cool. Like it's. I'm not saying this is the only way. This is just how I look at it. So my biggest priority when I'm talking to people about, fertility and being a father, which is what the conversations I'm talking to people about, is you need to be a capable man. Like any male can be a dad, but not every man can be a father. Like there's a big difference. So if you've got low testosterone and your life is complete fucking shambles and you can't look after yourself and you're having panic attacks left, right, and center, conceiving offspring is not the priority. Like it really shouldn't be. And if it is, then you're setting yourself up for some really stressful times, because when that baby comes, you are fucked, my friend, unless you can get your shit together. So the most important thing is like, and this is where guys go, oh, I don't want to go on TRT because it might compromise my fertility. And I'd say that the biggest compromise that you've got going on is going to be another decade of low testosterone in terms of how that's going to impact A, your actual fertility, but B, what kind of sperm are you going to be producing? What kind of genetic blueprint are you going to be passing on if you've had low testosterone for decades prior to conception? Your child is not going to be the same child that would come out if you had conceived a higher testosterone baby due to the epigenetic signaling of these hormones. And this, to me, is common sense. Has this been studied? No. But it's something that we can just look at and go, yeah, I intuitively feel like I want to pass on the best version of myself. So well before I was into all this stuff around hormones, I was very into epigenetics. That was one of my main areas of interest. And what people can do prior to conception, as well as while the mother is pregnant, to impact the epigenetics of the baby. And what all the studies I looked into showed in all different pathways is that your physical, mental health prior to conception for even multiple years will have a very strong impact on the genome of the baby, and it becomes more influential the closer it is to the actual pregnancy occurring itself. So people really need to focus, number one, on going, I need to look after myself first to get myself to the optimal level that I can be as a man. and then I need to address the fertility question. So that kind of makes TRT for some people just part of what they have to deal with. So when it comes to the fertility matter on TRT, basically what I say is if you were fertile before you started TRT, you should be able to regain or maintain at least a level of fertility that allows for a successful pregnancy to occur. So I recommend people at first, and ideally, I haven't had anyone have to come off, but stay on TRT and add in 500 units of HCG a day while you're trying to conceive. Like, this is a higher dose, but HCG primarily stimulates LH, but it also has spillover to FSH. So I recommend using, if you're trying to conceive, use a minimum of 250 units a day, which is the amount required for maximizing intratesticular testosterone production. But I think to get more spillover into LH, it makes a bit more sense to push it up to about 500 units a day. If that fails, and assuming that she's all good as well, then you want to look into adding in something like HMG or FSH, and then doing that to basically bring it home, so to speak. So that's like your big trump card in the back pocket. And then if those options fail, it likely meant that your fertility was compromised in the first place. And if that was, and this is the biggest thing that I see happen all the time, is that what people need to understand is if you have and had low testosterone for a long time, there is a good chance that your fertility is compromised because it's the same area of the body that has dysfunction. So where there's smoke, there's fire, and it doesn't mean that we'll always have issues. I don't have any fertility issues, fortunately, but it depends on what got you to the low testosterone state that you started your treatment. So a lot of guys don't realize that they were infertile before they started treatment. They find out they're infertile and they blame the TRT. That's not really correct. And while I do see some guys get quite heavily shut down fertility-wise from TRT, I see plenty of guys who don't. So it's case by case, but ideally you want to be able to stay on TRT and use HCG and HMG to conceive and not have to come off, because that way you're going to be passing on the best version of yourself. You're also going to have a way better sex drive and sexual function as well. So you'll be able to have more chances of scoring a goal, so to speak. And yeah, that's just what I found has worked best for people. And I haven't had anyone need to come off.
Clear. Kiki B. Hi, my boyfriend is 32 years old. He has hypogonadism and he stopped TRT due to no access during COVID time. He has low energy and concentration. Checked his testosterone is 13. Now using androgel, it's not helping. Well, androgel.
Yeah, it's because androgel's dog shit. I think if androgel's the same as testogel, it's like 1% or something. Yeah. Yeah, it would if he's in Australia, I mean, let me know. But yeah, you can't stop TRT. And one of my biggest things that I put out to my clients when this whole shebang started was, you guys need to make sure that you have continuous access to testosterone, and that's your responsibility. And I'm not encouraging people to break the law in whatever country they live in, but it's your responsibility, it's your treatment. So it is very unfortunate that he lost access to that treatment, but I would hope that would act as a learning experience to not go through this again, and he needs to restart his treatment. Androgel won't do dick compared to injections for most people. Some people can hyper respond to it, but it's still like a gross, smelly, sticky, like it's disgusting stuff to put on, and it doesn't work. So yeah, he needs to go back on injections or like a compounded cream that's ideally 20% or at least 15%. But yeah, I mean, like in this group, like, I mean, he should be able to get a provider from a referral from one of us. I mean, surely we can work that out, unless he's in a very remote country. But even so, I mean, most countries can now be serviced by the providers in our network. So yeah, just let us know where you're from.
Okay, Dave, we're almost at 1 hour. So maybe repeat to the viewers that are still there how to reach you if they want to work with you.
Yeah. So you can book with me via advancedfundamentalhealth.com. I've got a very small handful of bookings available for the end of 2022. I've also got an ebook coming out soon. It's currently getting proofread and then designed. That'll be up soon. It's called TRT 101. It's like a 30-page crash course into like my recommendations on how to do TRT and how to start it. It's a very personal, this is my recommendation. So really excited to release that, because it allows more people to get access to my approaches and protocols, because I'm quite heavily booked at the moment. but yeah, advancedfundamentalhealth.com. You can send me an inquiry on that. I reply to all the emails I receive, so very happy to help. And if anyone's in Australia struggling to get access to treatment, even if I can't take you on, or even if you can't afford to work with me, send me an email with like all your shit. And if I can point you in the right direction, I will put you in touch with a clinic that can help you. So it's very important, if you are in Australia and you're seeking treatment, don't just go to any clinic you find on Google, because you'll end up on a 10% test cream with 1.5% DHEA and a 12-month contract.
He's in South Africa, the last guy, 32 years old.
That is one place I can't touch, is South Africa, unfortunately. I don't have any referral providers in South Africa, unfortunately.
Okay. So one last question there. Beyond the normal low T symptoms, I have low heart rate and blood pressure when I lay down, but whenever I move or eat or whatever, I have very high heart rate and blood pressure. Can it be related to low T?
It can be, but it can also be related to issues with low sodium. It can be related to issues with low cortisol and adrenal issues. So I would get a pituitary MRI to see if you've got any kind of issues with the pituitary. I'd also have all your adrenal hormones checked as well. I'd get a full metabolic workup for that, because there can be so many things that will cause, everything from positional hypertension, hypotension, and this can be quite debilitating for some people. I've also seen it occur from this was a once in a blue moon thing, but I mean, I guess there could be two people, but I've seen it occur from a clinical norepinephrine deficiency, which was resolved with supplementing with adrenal medulla extract. But that was like a rare genetic thing, but it's much more likely that there is a root cause that would come up on like a blood panel, like sports BB4 plus, as I mentioned before. But yeah, it could be low testosterone related, but it could be related to a whole bunch of other things as well. And potentially, if it's related to something else, that could also be part of what's causing the low testosterone potentially. So it's worth looking at everything.
Okay. So let's wrap this up, Dave. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Thank you for everyone for hanging out and asking questions.
Okay, so if there's any more questions, write it under the video in the comments. We'll get back to you later. Okay, Absolutely. Dave, have a nice rest of your day.